Understanding the dark chapters of history is not merely an academic exercise, it is a vital necessity for the preservation of human dignity and freedom. To study Mein Kampf, written by Adolf Hitler, rather than being an author titled Mein Kampf, is to examine the blueprint of a catastrophe. This text serves as a stark reminder that the most destructive forces in human history do not always begin with violence, but with ideas, narratives, and the manipulation of the human spirit. Our journey through this summary is not to find inspiration in the ideology it presents, but to find the motivational fire to protect the values of liberty, truth, and empathy. By understanding how a society can be led toward the abyss, we empower ourselves to recognize the warning signs in the modern world and ensure that never again remains a lived reality rather than a hollow phrase. If you love powerful, insightful, and life-changing books, then you've found the right channel. Every week, we break down the ideas that transform mindsets, elevate success, and shift lives. So don't miss out. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications because you'll want to catch every book we review. Let's continue. The architecture of narrative and the peril of propaganda. The foundation of the text lies in the absolute mastery of narrative. Hitler argued that the masses are not reached through intellectual debate, but through the persistent repetition of simple, emotionally charged messages. He posited that the broad masses have a limited capacity for processing complex information, and therefore political messaging must be reduced to a few core points and hammered home relentlessly. This leads us to our first lesson. The survival of a free society depends on the critical thinking skills of its citizens to dismantle totalizing narratives. When a single story is allowed to dominate the public consciousness, the nuance required for a functioning democracy begins to evaporate. In contemporary American perspective, we see the resonance of this in the echo chambers of social media. The algorithmic reinforcement of specific viewpoints creates a modern version of the persistent repetition Hitler advocated for. When citizens are only exposed to one side of an argument, they lose the ability to empathize with or even understand the opposing view. Globally, the rise of fake news and state-sponsored disinformation campaigns are direct descendants of the propaganda techniques outlined in the 1920s. As Friedrich Nietzsche famously noted, "I'm not upset that you lied to me. I'm upset that from now on I can't believe you." This quote underscores the ultimate price of the manipulation of truth, the total collapse of social trust. When a leader or a movement systematically attacks the concept of objective reality, as seen in various populist movements worldwide today, they are following the playbook of creating a truth that serves only their power. The lesson is clear. Vigilance against the erosion of truth is the first line of defense against tyranny. The weaponization of grievance and the stab in the back. Systematically following the control of narrative is the identification of a target for collective frustration. Hitler utilized the Dolchstoßlegende, or the stab-in-the-back myth, the idea that the German army did not lose World War I on the battlefield, but was betrayed at home by internal enemies, primarily Jews and socialists. This leads to the second lesson. Beware of any political movement that builds its identity on the foundation of victimhood and the demonization of a specific group. By framing every national failure as the result of a conspiracy by the other, a leader can bypass the need for actual policy solutions and instead offer the emotional catharsis of vengeance. In recent times, we see this globally in the rise of exclusionary nationalism. In various parts of Europe and India, political rhetoric often centers on the idea that a pure national identity is being diluted or betrayed by immigrants or religious minorities. From an American perspective, the intensifying rhetoric surrounding the elites versus the people can sometimes slide into a similar territory where complex socio-economic issues are blamed entirely on a perceived internal enemy. This weaponization of grievance prevents honest self-reflection. If the problem is always them, then we never have to change. This leads to a systematic hardening of hearts, where protection of one's own group becomes a justification for the persecution of another. The fragility of institutions and the deification of leadership as grievances weaponized. The next step is the systematic dismantling of institutional checks and balances in favor of the Führerprinzip, the leadership principle. The book argues that democracy is a weak, indecisive system, and that true national greatness can only be achieved through the absolute authority of a single visionary leader. This brings us to a crucial lesson. Strong institutions are more important than strong leaders. A system that relies on the perfection of one person is a system designed to fail. We see the danger of this today in the global trend of democratic backsliding. In countries like Hungary and Turkey, we have witnessed the systematic weakening of the judiciary, the press, and independent oversight bodies under the guise of the will of the people. In the United States, the intense polarization often leads supporters on both sides of the aisle to wish for an executive who can just get things done by bypassing Congress or the courts. However, the lesson of history is that when the rules of the game are broken to help your side win, they remain broken when the other side takes power. Totalitarianism is the final result of a society that decides it values efficiency and strength more than the rule of law. As the philosopher Hannah Arendt observed, the aim of totalitarian education has never been to instill convictions, but to destroy the capacity to form any.
The alchemy of economic despair and political radicalization. The rise of the ideology described in the book was not an accident of personality. It was fueled by the hyperinflation and economic ruin of the Weimar Republic. Hitler understood that a man with an empty stomach is more likely to listen to a radical promise. This leads to the next systematic lesson. Economic inequality and the loss of a stable middle class are the primary breeding grounds for extremist ideologies. When people feel that the system is rigged against them and that their children will have a lower standard of living than they did, the moderate incremental progress of democracy begins to look like a failure. In recent American history, the 2008 financial crisis and the subsequent slow recovery for the working class provided the spark for radical movements on both the left and the right. Globally, the left-behind populations in deindustrialized regions have become the most fertile ground for populist leaders who promise to return to a mythical golden age. The lesson is that social justice and economic stability are not just moral goals, they are national security requirements. A society that does not provide a path to prosperity for the many will eventually be torn down by the few who see no stake in its survival. The lethal silence of the majority. Finally, the most haunting lesson of the rise of the regime described in Mein Kampf is not the behavior of the fanatics, but the apathy of the bystanders. The book describes a movement that was often small, fringe, and ridiculed, yet it succeeded because the majority of citizens believed that it couldn't happen here, or that the radicals could be tamed by the political establishment. This leads to our final, most urgent lesson. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing. In our modern global context, this resonates in the way we often ignore the gradual erosion of norms. We see it when people stay silent in the face of bigotry because they don't want to get political, or when corporations prioritize profit over human rights in authoritarian markets. From an American perspective, the decline in civic participation and the rise of voter apathy are the modern equivalents of the silence that allowed the Weimar Republic to collapse. The story of history is not written by the powerful alone, but by the choices of every individual. We are motivated not by the darkness of the past, but by the light of what we can build when we stand together. True strength is not found in the crushing violence or absolute authority depicted in cinematic tropes of power, but in the quiet, defiant courage of those who refuse to let the truth be silenced. If this message resonated with you, subscribe and join us for more wisdom that fuels growth.